So, not for nothing had Pythagoras, for example, who ran his own incredible mystery school 500 years before this life of mine, he'd also visited Egypt and had gone through an initiation in a school very similar to the one I was running at the time. And he was an amazing student who, on his students, he imposed a vow of silence for the first year of their probation. Trappist monks do silence. In deep wisdom schools, silence is part of that. And what that's about is about not speaking the wrong thing at the wrong time, learning stillness. And this is why I've not spoken out about all this. I mean, I've given talks in this format on politics and on ethics and so on, but I've not shared this level of depth. But I feel now it's kind of, it's such an apocalyptic time that now is the time for unveiling, revealing. Apocalypse means revelation in Greek. It means unveiling, revealing. Like the unveiling of the goddess, Isis, as in Blavatsky's great work, Isis Unveiled. So, what happened next, she asked. Well, I began to get other news. It trickled through from contacts and traders, students and sages. There were claimed to have been sightings of my former student after his death. Some claimed he'd been seen alive again. I tried to confirm this, to find an explanation. Some of his followers claimed he'd been indeed succeeding in performing the resurrection mystery, that he had literally risen from death and come back into human life again. I suspended judgment. In my own teachings, I knew this was not altogether impossible. It was part of a series of mysteries that were taught in our schools. We certainly knew that the soul lived on after death. But to take a human body again, to take the same human body again, was something so rare that we had only the barest possible teachings concerning this. Was it possible, I wondered, that he had been able to achieve a self-initiated mastery of the very highest mysteries, and that he'd been able to, and so equipped to undertake this most profound of all mystical transformations? I wasn't sure. It might have been possible. Certainly he was an advanced enough student, and with the right preparation and with the right configuration of circumstances, if anyone could have pulled this off, it could have been him. I received other reports. Yes, he'd been seen. He had resurrected. More and more evidence came through to that effect in trickles and snatches. But I remained unconvinced and felt there might just be wishful thinking going on. Maybe his followers had wanted him to resurrect so much they literally conjured him out of their own tortured imaginations back into life. I wanted it to be true, but I wanted truth more than any particular angle on truth. So I remained open to the possibility, but I still lacked final proof. And in my own training, I was not allowed to give assent to something unless I'd seen or tested the actual evidence for myself. So, and then what? What happened next, she asked. I carried on with my teachings, consolidating a lifetime of work. I had many more students, carrying on with the initiations, teachings. I set tests, some passed, some failed, some tried again. Life continued. And about my former student, I remained in suspense. Then, towards the end of my life, a new and somewhat disturbing state of affairs developed. I heard that some of his followers, none of whom seemed to know about my existence, or his sojourn studying with me, began to state categorically that not only had he resurrected, but furthermore, that unless one believed this, one was damned. that the whole world was now under judgment and was soon to be passing away into a new order of things. And only through faith in this man could one be saved from the coming calamitous judgment. Well, with all due respect, I found these messages a bit ridiculous and pompous in the extreme. Even if I had managed to achieve the once in a myriad of years resurrection mystery, it was hardly a reason to condemn the rest of mankind to eternal damnation. Sorry, if he had managed to achieve this, it was hardly an excuse to then condemn the rest of mankind to eternal damnation, or to wish to see the world vanish and be destroyed. This was a perverse kind of thinking. How did you react? Said Catherine. What did you feel? I felt upset, dismayed, I said. The tolerance and gentleness which underlay the teachings of our goddess traditions in Egypt was seemingly being swept away and replaced with a stronger, sterner and more fanatical position. That there was no truth, and there was only one truth, represented by the teachings of this former student of mine, and that unless one turned to him invisibly in his resurrected state, the entire totality of all former teachings and wisdom were as nothing, as straw, as chaff blown in the wind. I was appalled at this, the logic of this position, because it meant literally that all our temples, all our schools, all their teachings were as nothing and would pass away into dust, to be replaced by a will-o'-the-wisp, a possibility, a hope, a faint chimera that such and such a one had managed to achieve the rare grace of the resurrection mystery. So how could such an achievement annul and replace the collected teachings of the whole of mankind's previous spiritual history, which is tens of thousands of years? I mean, the old pagan traditions of Egypt were already thousands of years old by then. I was a newcomer in that life, and the same in the Celtic world, in the Druid schools. They'd been going for thousands of years, and everywhere in the world. So how could they all be invalidated, was what I was, puzzling in my soul. And then she said, well, what happened, at the end of your life? Well, I died, not in peace. I had this gnawing feeling that there was a disturbance in the force, so to say, and that I was partly to blame by letting that student go away. Anyway, then I'm not going to read the whole thing, because I then go. She then took me into the what happened after death in the interlife state, and I came before the judgment seat, the past life review hall, so to speak, and I encountered the gods and Isis, and I was, I confessed that life had been problematic, because it occurred to me that now all the wisdom of the ancient pagans was to be swept away and consumed by fire, hatred, fanaticism, and so on. I'll let you read the thing. It's in volume 4 to see the whole thing in detail. But the implication of this, I was told by the goddess that I shouldn't take it personally. It wasn't my fault. I'd been part of that process, and now it will not have escaped your intelligence, I'm sure, if you've been listening to this carefully, that student is the person, Rabbi Yeshua from Palestine, and that he then later was called Rabbi Yeshua, the Christus, the Christ, the Messiah, and the tradition that arose in the wake of those teachings was what we know loosely as Christianity. But there were many schools of Christianity, and ever since, so that past life regression was in 98. I came back from Oklahoma, with my mind bubbling with this. It was incredible, the experience I'd had. I mean, you couldn't make it up, really. And to me, a lot of things fell into place when I had that past life regression, because I'd spent years studying all the world's religious spiritual teachings, just as if I'd been a kind of temple elder in this life. Only there are a few temples to attach oneself to now, that's the trouble. And I'd always had a deep interest in Christianity, in Judaism, in revealed religions, in Islam. I'd read all their texts, I'd taken initiations in them all, I'd been baptized and so on. I loved them all, but I wasn't 100% convinced by any of them that they were 100% fully accurate. I felt there was something missing, and that was the pagan traditions. So that's why I got involved with the Druid community, with the runic community, the ancient wisdom schools, why I'd been drawn to the Native American culture, religions, and the shamanic traditions, and I'd taken initiation in them by the 90s. So I was kind of part pagan, part revealed religion, and I was working trying to synthesize and reconcile them. And I still am. I still think that we have to get a peace between the revealed monotheistic religions like Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism to some extent, who have this kind of we are the last prophet, definitive message, this is the final word from God type thing. And the more pagan, laid back, this is the primal religion that's always been here, like the mountains. These two approaches are seemingly at odds with each other still. And there are fanatics on both wings. I've met fanatical pagans who, when they discover I'm kind of interested in Christianity and stuff, they regard me as, the Beelzebub. I mean, I'm the devil because I care about the revealed religions. And I've met Christians and Muslims who, when they discover I'm interested in paganism, they regard me as the Antichrist because, God, that's the devil, And, but no, I'm walking a very, fine line between the two. And this is why I've actually set up this study for the scientific study of the devil. My response to that kind of accusation is to say, well, okay, what do you mean by the devil? Because each of the revealed religions means a different thing. And each of the pagan religions, they don't really have a devil. They have a different kind of understanding of the force of nature. They have Pan. Well, that's not a devil. They have Pluto, but that's the lord of the underworld. I mean, who's the devil in Greek religion? Is it Prometheus, who gives us fire and thinking and thought? Or is it Zeus, who's a tyrant who oppresses us and won't let Prometheus bring us the fire? No, if we were sitting down with Socrates and we were talking about this, he'd scratch his beard and say, I don't know. And that's my method. I'm a Socratic teacher. One thing I want to say, by the way, about Socrates' greatest student, Plato, who was a very advanced soul, who also set up his own kind of mystery school. He called it the Academy in Athens. And I'm an academic too, that's one of my hats, and why I bothered to get a PhD and all that, because I love Plato's work and the Academy. And Plato wrote a very important book called The Republic, which is about how we can get an ideal state on the planet. And we're totally screwed. This planet's, lost the plot. We're in lockdown here. And the politicians haven't got a clue what they're doing because they don't tell the truth, right? Nobody listens to me. I've been saying for a year they ought to take an oath to tell the truth, but because I'm not rich, famous and powerful, nobody listens to me. All I do is tell the truth. And this is the sword of the Druids of Britain, which, is the symbol of that, truth-telling power. But Plato was a great man, a great philosopher, and in the school in Egypt where I taught and was director of studies, we knew all about Neoplatonic philosophy. I mean, he was on our curriculum. We had to study him, and in the Republic, which is one of his great works, talking about the ideal state, how we can build a society based on justice, at the very end there's a mysterious section called the Myth of which most students don't read. I did philosophy at Bristol University. We weren't told to read the Myth of I had to read it many years later and discover it, like finding a gold mine. And it's one of the first near-death experiences in history. in the myth of an Athenian soldier called Er, dies in a battle and is going to be buried burned on the funeral pyre. But the custom was to have 2 or 3 days feasting celebration before burning them in those days in Greece. And just as they were about to burn him, I think 2 days in, he woke up on the funeral pyre and said, "Don't burn me, I've got a tale to tell." And he had had a near-death experience. He died, and he'd gone to the Elysian fields. He'd gone to the afterlife. Exactly as you see described in hospital reports now in the 21st century. And as I've studied for many years and taught, it's on the A-level philosophy syllabus, survival of the life after death is part of the subject for philosophy. Anyway, Plato had put this in, and of course Plato was wise enough. Oh, by the way, he'd also visited Egypt. He'd been down to these temple schools. I mean, Plato was, a sage, right? He's like the Western Buddha, if you want. And in fact, in the Republic, he also uses the image of the cave. We humans are stuck, as it were, in a cave, just looking at reflections on a wall from the fire that's burning behind us, seeing our shadows. We're not seeing reality here. We're, as it were, in a cave of darkness with a few flickering lights that we can perceive. Our job as seekers of truth is to get out of the cave, free ourselves from the chains, get out and see the sun, which is the Logos, the One, the Good. This is all taken from Egyptian cosmology, dear old Plato. And then that's the enlightenment experience. That's when the sage becomes enlightened, right? And then you have a duty to go back in and tell the people in the cave and get them liberated, so to speak. So this is all in the Republic. If you've not read it, read all of Plato's work. I'm working on a commentary on some of his works, and you can listen to my reading of the Timaeus. It's on my Global Green University website. There'll be a commentary there eventually. The Timaeus is Plato's version of creation. It's like the book of Genesis, and therefore it's a very important book that was greatly revered in Neoplatonic circles and in even in medieval Christian universities in Paris and so on. So I think it's very important that Plato puts reincarnation theory, which is the import of the myth of read the whole thing, I won't tell you it all, as the context in which we can reform society. So this metaphysical wisdom, which is to do with things like the soul, the afterlife, rebirth and so on, has to be at the basis of any social, political or economic reforms we do in society. If not, if we leave the soul out, if we try and do a sort of social engineering, do social reform in that way, like totalitarian rulers have tried, like Mao Zedong or whatever, who massacred Buddhists just for believing in reincarnation and having their own spiritual teachings. He shut all their schools and killed them all, or tried to. Some survived. But that was a fanatical totalitarian ruler who didn't understand wisdom. And the same with Stalin, who was doing the same in Russia. Well, no, Plato had a completely different idea. He said, look, we start with morality. We start with our own spiritual journeying. And then we advance from there. And Christ had the same teaching. I mean, because he came from our school. The point, what's the significance of what I'm saying? Why am I sharing this at this time? Because I'm a peacemaker in this life. I have been in lots of previous lives, including that Egyptian one. And I'm still trying to make peace between the different religions and warring factions and sections of our planet who are still plotting with their armies and conspiracies and vast expenditure. These are warlords run amok, right? Confucius had the same problem in China in his day. How can you discipline these warlords? He became a spiritual teacher. He set up an academy, a school, just as Plato had done, because in Greece in Plato's time it was dangerous. Warring parties, Sparta versus Athens, the Persians kept trying to invade, what can a poor man do apart from just teach, right? So I feel the same now. And really I'm appealing to all the sages and say, living esoteric teachers out there. Let's work together. Now you know a bit more about who I am. Tell me more about who you are. And let's find a way of getting these teachings, the goddess teachings, the initiations, that the common root of all of these traditions, into the public domain. Now, not only, whilst we're on lockdown, we can share virtually, but once we come out of lockdown, there are people running courses, workshops, trainings, initiations, and so on. So let's up the ante. I'm a great believer in intellectual rigour, you see. I want to end the divorce between the sort of the pagans in the woods dancing around the fire and the academics in Oxford or Cambridge having learned seminars. I think it's time to reconcile the goddess with the goddess of wisdom, which is the goal of philosophy. And I'm a great believer that our universities need reform to take on board the content of spiritual wisdom more. That's why I set up the Global Green University as a forum for, let's say, more advanced academic thinking, because too many academics are pseudo-academics. They're sophists. They just charge money to tell you your ideas are wrong. I've met middle-ranking academics that just see their role in totally negative forms. It's like to diss you, whatever you're saying. And if you've had visions and seen deep wisdom, then be careful, you might be stuck in a mental hospital. That's what most academics are like these days. And they're coming, unfortunately, a totally materialistic paradigm has taken over most of these so-called academics who, they kind of self-publish each other's work, they refer to each other, and that's how they get on. It's a scam. Now, unfortunately, these are the people that have done all the research into coronavirus. That methodology has taken over medicine. And I admire people like Robert Kennedy for speaking out against that. It literally is a mafia that's taken over medicine, which is one of the most sacred healing arts of all ancient cultures' achievements, going back to the time of those temple schools in Egypt and in Greece. We were, really close, our cultures. So Hippocrates and the Hippocratic Oath came out of that tradition for Asclepius. You swore an oath as a doctor to tell the truth and to not misuse your power, not to take advantage of people, etc. I've got the oath here in my book of peace declarations, because the Hippocratic Oath is a kind of peace declaration, actually, for personal peace, what a doctor will do. And I've argued in my talks that we need a similar oath for scientists, so-called scientists. These are nescientists who are prostituting themselves to make weapons of mass destruction on vast inflated budgets, getting paid by the Pentagon and the British Ministry of Defence and the equivalents around the world in China and Russia. These aren't scientists. They've lost their ethical way. I would insist they all go and read the collected works of Plato and answer questions on the myth of Ur. And all should have some kind of past life regression to see what on earth, why they're doing what they're doing. Okay, so what else do I want to share? I want to talk about why the goddess teachings are so important for our time. And I'm so delighted to see, the internet enables people to share. For the first time really in history, you can share and talk to people across the world. I've been interviewed by people in Canada or America or India or whatever. We have this amazing tool. Now, to me, the goddess represents interconnectivity. It's like a lattice of energies that we're all connected by. And in Buddhist parlance, the goddess is also called Shunyata, which means the absolute void, which is the space that doesn't move. If you think about it, as I'm talking to the camera, We're moving through space at tens of thousands of miles an hour in the various pirouettes the planet's doing. The only thing that's not moving is absolute space. And that is in Shunyata teachings, that is the absolute void. That is nirvana, that is consciousness. So we're moving through a matrix field of consciousness, which is why we appear to stay standing still. There are some advanced teachings that I'm, happy to share, perhaps on another occasion. But the goddess is a very, very profound. I mean, in the Solomonic tradition of the Kabbalah, which is a very profound teaching, and it comes from the same root as all these that I'm talking about. The Moses tradition was also inspired by the same Egyptian wisdom traditions that I was representing in that life. And Moses was part trained in the schools of Egypt, just as I had been. And in the Kabbalah, which is the oral teachings that came down, then he partly received and then he transmitted onwardly. The Ein Sof is the absolute. It's the force field that holds the Shekinah, the divine wisdom. Now Solomon, the king, who understood this and synthesized all this teaching and began the temple building in Jerusalem as a symbol for that wisdom, right? That primordial wisdom. In the Solomonic writings, the goddess is revered as wisdom, as the Shekinah. Well, that's what the temple in Jerusalem stands for. And that's what, those people that want to rebuild the temple. I mean, that's why I'm proposing we build, let's just start humbly. Forget the temple thing. Let's just have a peace tent. Like a lovely giant Bedouin peace tent. Or like the kind of thing Abraham would have wandered about in. But all Jews, Christians and Muslims revere Abraham and Moses. So let's, in honour of that tradition, that lineage, have a wisdom tent where we can come together and discuss and debate peace. Have discussions like we're having now. There on Temple Mount, that's what it's for, that's why it's there. Let's reconfigure what peace is and what the Shekinah is, what the goddess is. Let's not ban thought. Because thought, the reason why the 18th century liberals and Enlightenment Freemasons bashed on about freedom of thought, why it's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is because without freedom of thought, we can't get to the truth. Just as without freedom of speech, we can't get to the truth. These are incredibly important ideas, and that's what academic freedom means. It means it's also a rigorous responsibility to get to the truth. So a true academic, it's not a sort of cushy number, freedom of thought. It's a huge responsibility. I've spent years using my freedom of thought to piece together truths that, and I've pieced from thousands of myriads of books and meetings and encounters with remarkable teachers, men and women. So that's what I'm sharing now. It's time for this, isn't it? You or I could be dead before I can record another one of these talks. I want to talk about something else that's incredibly sacred, which is sexuality, because part of the goddess initiations is the whole question of sexuality. It's one of the most profound things that we can do on this planet. It's where we come from. We honour Moses said, honour your mother and father. What he meant by that was honour the source, honour the root of being, honour the sexual energy that you come from. Your mother and your father are the Shekinah and the Yahweh principle. The mother and father that we are within us, all of us. And that's why sexuality is often, sacred sexuality is part of that initiatory experience in all schools, Tibetan, Egyptian, Druidical, all the rest of them, Hindu, Tantric, whatever. And, but we're getting it wrong. On this planet, people don't understand sexuality. It's ridiculous. And I despair when I read of the Jeffrey Epsteins of this world and sexual abuse going on and violence. Sex and violence are not natural bedfellows any more than like petrol and matches. Keep them apart. Sex is part of the peace tradition. And we have to totally rethink our relationship to sexuality. It's interesting that in this time of lockdown, you're forced together with your intimate partner or whatever, your spouse, if you have one, and therefore a lot of tension, a lot of conflicts are breaking out because maybe people are with the wrong spouse, and they can just about cope when they're not forced into continual proximity. This is why I wrote a book on wisdom affairs. To refine and reform our understanding of sexuality, we have to really purify our relationship to that force of Eros and get it right. And the only way to do that is to only explore sexuality in a sacred relationship with a partner that is committed to the path of the sacred relationship as well. And the fundamental thing about what makes it sacred is it's a co-commitment to non-violence. So there's no shouting, swearing, hitting, violence of any kind. So that rules out probably millions of marriages that are going on the planet where people are being violent to each other. They're not sacred relationships, and therefore sexuality shouldn't be happening. Also, it rules out all kinds of abuse and psychological abuse, which is maybe not physical violence, but you can be psychologically abusive, and you see that in relationships. No, read the book on wisdom affairs. All that's ruled out of order. And if you can't find a person like that worthy of you, then be happy to be celibate. Because we are a living relationship in ourselves, singularly. I am, male, female, and I'm, swirling massive energies. I mean, I actually, Maya Shakti in person speaking here. And all of us are. So we should be free to explore our unique individuality. And then if you can find someone that is on that same wavelength, that resonance, then that's your wisdom partner. Go for that. And the core thing is a core commitment to non-violence and a core commitment to spiritual evolution. So you evolve your thinking, your service. It doesn't mean you're on totally the same, intellectual wavelength. You might be doing very different things. One of you might be an artist, another a gardener, the other a writer, the other a singer. It doesn't matter. It's often best to have a complementary partner that isn't exactly as you are. Then you can do more because you cover more bases together. Anyway, it's all in the book, so that's what's so important. And I'm interested in the whole, the psychobiology of Eros, and that's why I've written a book about the egg. I think the egg is a very important sacred thing, which I'm just about to publish. And also, why I've been interested in the whole Mary Magdalene tradition. And I want to just mention that, I'm coming on to that question, because what was Christ's relationship to esoteric sexuality? I believe he had the same, I think we taught him to have this reverence for sexuality. He knew how important it was and sacred. And I think that was part of his innermost teachings. I think that's what was transmitted through the Gnostic schools. And I'm pretty sure that his consort was Mary Magdalene. Now, I in that past life regression, I didn't meet her, Mary Magdalene. As far as I know, she didn't come to our school. It's occurred to me since that past life regression that maybe that's why he didn't come back. He was having his own goddess initiation, as it were, and didn't need to come back to us. Well, I take my hat off if that's true. And that's why I set up the Mary Magdalene Studies Association here in France. Because she's been so, neglected by the official church. There isn't even an academic society devoted to her studies, which is completely bonkers, given that the Dominican order, she's their patron saint. And yet they set up the